Good morning. This is Ron. It is Monday, April the 30th. Welcome to Story Time. Okay, so it is Monday, April the 30th, and I'm going to have again my four segments, my monologue, and then followed by a critique of Rush Limbaugh and reading a chapter of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand, and ending up with a few jokes from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book. So over the weekend, Bill Cosby, the comedian, was convicted of rape, sexual assault. I don't remember exactly what the charge was, but he's facing 30 years in prison. And one of the issues has been about his accusers. He apparently has 60 accusers, and that a lot of them, their rape, the sexual abuse that they suffered was happened decades ago. That it is outside of the statute of limitations, and a lot of people have wondered, well, why is it that these victims haven't come forward sooner? And the reason the reason or reasons that's most often given are psychological in nature. That they were afraid of Bill Cosby, that they were intimidated by his power within the entertainment industry, and so they felt that they could not come forward, that they wouldn't be listened to, or that they wouldn't be taken seriously. But I contend that the reason for their reluctance to come forward is not psychological, but is intellectual and actually philosophical in nature. What's been going on over the past 3 or 4 decades is the gradual subversion of American culture by the forces of the left, by idealists who are trying to create an American counterculture. And an American counterculture dominated by skepticism, materialism, and determinism, to name but three, but there's several of them. And to subvert metaphysics and epistemology and ethics and even aesthetics. So one of these subversions that's been occurring is the idea that reality is unknowable, that nothing can be known with certainty, and that if you are somebody that proclaims to know things with certainty, let's say Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh comes out and does make one of the good things about his show is that he does make statements of certainty, that he's sure about things, and people like that make and myself for that matter, that make statements of certainty very often are punished, and they're punished with threats of being socially shunted or shunned. Let's just say that they've been being socially shunned and isolated, and it's usually done with taunts of fascist or something of that nature. So put yourself in the position of one of these women, these many years ago, and you go to Bill Cosby's house, apartment, hotel room, whatever, in order to have a conversation with him about your career and get some hints and tips on how you can be a better actress. You're given something to drink, you start to feel woozy, and then you pass out. And when you wake up, there's evidence that you have been sexually assaulted. Your clothes are off, or they're disheveled. Your panties aren't on straight, or they're not on at all. There may be some fluids or bodily fluids on various places on you, etc. But again, since you've been told nothing can be known with certainty, and especially now add to the mix that you have been drugged or at least you think you've been drugged. All you know is that you've lost consciousness for a period of time. And so you think about, of course, going to the police department and filing a complaint. But in order to do that, to file a police complaint requires a certainty about reality and certainty about facts and events. Because when you go to the police department and you say that you want to make a charge of rape, of course, one of the first things the police is going to ask you is, how do you know? How can you be sure? And with that skepticism in the back of your mind that nobody can be sure of anything, then you're paralyzed. You realize there's no point in going to the police because you have no confidence in your own senses, in the evidence of your own senses. Because that's ultimately what it comes down to, is knowledge is going to be coming down to the use of your mind, but using the information provided to you by your own senses. And if you've been buying into the skeptics' exhortations, then you realize that the evidence of your own senses are suspect. Then that's a lot of what skeptics are trying to use as proof of their statement that nothing can be known with certainty, is that our senses lie to us. We can hallucinate. We can hear things that aren't there, see things that aren't there, or see things displayed in ways that are not correct. And one of the classic examples, is you put a stick into water and it looks like it's bent, but it's not. So there you are. You're not terribly sure of your own senses. You've been drugged anyhow. So how can you be absolutely sure that you were sexually assaulted? So you doubt all of the evidence in your own mind. Now, a lot of people may say, well, but these women went ahead and made the allegations anyhow. Yes, they did. Years later, decades later, and they did so as a group. That's part of the reason that they've received a lot of sympathy and support in the news departments and in the so-called media, is because they've done it as a collective. Because one of the corollaries to skepticism, the idea that nothing can be known with certainty, is that what is real is what the majority says is real. So if you have one woman that may come forward, and she's coming forward not so much to make the accusation because she's absolutely certain of what it is that happened to her, but because she's looking for, and you'll notice this in press conferences that they will have, they'll ask, the attorney that's with them will ask them, we want other people who have suffered a similar fate, whatever, to come forward. So you get enough people. In this particular case, you get one, and then two, and then there's a trickle and a flood of women that are coming forward to make similar accusations against Mr. Cosby. And so what happens there is you have numbers. The original woman that comes forward, can now feel satisfied that what happened to her was real, that she was sexually assaulted, and things did happen to her against her will, and she can be confident of this not because of her own experience, but because of the experiences of other women. So that's a shame. That's where the problem is. If you want women, or any victims for that matter, to go ahead and bring their issues forward in a timely manner, the thing that's in our society that has to go, that's got to be gone, that has to be fought and absolutely, utterly destroyed, is this false notion, this contradiction that nothing can be known with certainty. Okay, so when I come back, it's going to be chapter 17 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? Okay, Okay, so chapter 17, what can one do? And I'd said on my last episode of Story Time that this was the final chapter, and it is not. It is the next, the penultimate chapter, not the ultimate chapter in this book. This question is frequently asked by people who are concerned about the state of today's world and want to correct it. More often than not, it is asked in a form that indicates the cause of their helplessness. What can one person do? I was in the process of preparing this article when I received a letter from a reader who presents the problem and the error still more eloquently. How can an individual propagate your philosophy on a scale large enough to affect the immense changes which must be made in every walk of American life in order to create the kind of ideal country which you picture? If this is the way in which the question is posed, the answer is he can't. No one can change a country single-handed. So the first question to ask is, why do people approach the problem this way? Suppose you were a doctor in the midst of an epidemic. You would not ask, how can one doctor treat millions of patients and restore the whole country to perfect health? You would know, whether you were alone or part of an organized medical campaign, that you have to treat as many people as you can reach according to the best of your ability, and that nothing else is possible. It is a remnant of mystic philosophy, specifically of the mind-body split, that makes people approach intellectual issues in a manner they would not use to deal with physical problems. They would not seek to stop an epidemic overnight or to build a skyscraper single-handed, nor would they refrain from renovating their own crumbling house on the grounds that they are unable to rebuild the entire city. But in the realm of man's consciousness, the realm of ideas, they still tend to regard knowledge as irrelevant, and they expect to perform instantaneous miracles somehow, or they paralyze themselves by projecting an impossible goal. The reader whose letter I quoted was doing the right things, but felt that some wider scale of action was required. Many others merely ask the question, but do nothing. If you are seriously interested in fighting for a better world, begin by identifying the nature of the problem. The battle is primarily intellectual, philosophical, not political. Politics is the last consequence, the practical implementation of the fundamental metaphysical, epistemological, ethical ideas that dominate a given nature's culture. You cannot fight or change the consequences without fighting and changing the cause, nor can you attempt any practical implementation without knowing what it is you want to implement. I just want to interject here real quick is that she's absolutely right that when she is saying that you cannot fight or change consequences without fighting or changing the cause. What you're going to find, particularly, let's say, with politicians, is that if you do not get to the cause of what it is that they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing, then you're going to end up having an argument about or with that politician that is going to, in which both of you are going to argue past each other. And if you don't get to the root of the problem or the root of the issue as far as the politician is concerned, and you just argue past them, the politician is going to be free then to use the same premises in the future that he's using now and continue to create more problems. In an intellectual battle, you do not need to convert everyone. History is made by minorities, or, more precisely, history is made by intellectual movements which are created by minorities. Who belongs to these minorities? Anyone who is able and willing actively to concern himself with intellectual issues. Here, it is not quantity, but quality that counts, the quality and consistency of the ideas one is advocating. An intellectual movement does not start with organized action. Whom would one organize? A philosophical battle is a battle for men's minds, not an attempt to enlist blind followers. Ideas can be propagated only by men who understand them. An organized movement has to be preceded by an educational campaign which requires trained, self-trained teachers. Self-trained in the sense that a philosopher can offer you the material of knowledge, but it is your own mind that has to absorb it. Such training is the first requirement for being a doctor during an ideological epidemic, and the precondition of any attempt to change the world. Quote, the immense changes which must be made in every walk of American life, unquote, cannot be made singly, piecemeal, or retail, so to speak. An army of crusaders would not be enough to do it, but the factor that underlies and determines every aspect of human life is philosophy. Teach men the right philosophy, and their own minds will do the rest. Philosophy is the wholesaler in human affairs. Men cannot exist without some form of philosophy, i.e., some comprehensive view of life. Most men are not intellectual innovators, but they are receptive to ideas, are able to judge them critically, and to choose the right course, when and if it is offered. There are also a great many men who are indifferent to ideas and to anything beyond the concrete bound range of the immediate moment. Such men accept subconsciously whatever is offered by the culture of their time and swing blindly with any chance current. They are merely social ballast, be they day laborers or company presidents, and, by their own choice, irrelevant to the fate of the world. Today, most people are acutely aware of our cultural ideological vacuum. They are anxious, confused, and groping for answers. Are you able to enlighten them? Can you answer their questions? Can you offer a consistent case? Do you know how to correct their errors? Are you immune from the fallout of the constant barrage aimed at the destruction of reason? And can you provide others with anti missile missiles? A political battle is merely a skirmish fought with muskets. A philosophical battle is a nuclear war. If you want to influence a country's intellectual trend, the first step is to bring order to your own ideas and integrate them into a consistent case, to the best of your knowledge and ability. This does not mean memorizing and reciting slogans and principles, objectivist or otherwise. Knowledge necessarily includes the ability to apply abstract principles to concrete problems, to recognize the principles in specific issues, to demonstrate them, and to advocate a consistent course of action. This does not require omniscience or omnipotence. It is the subconscious expectation of automatic omniscience in oneself and in others that defeats many would-be crusaders and serves as an excuse for doing nothing. What is required is honesty, intellectual honesty, which consists in knowing what one does know, consistently expanding one's knowledge, and never constantly expanding one's knowledge, and never evading or failing to correct a contradiction. This means the development of an active mind as a permanent attribute. When or if your convictions are in your conscious, orderly control, you will be able to communicate them to others. This does not mean that you must make philosophical speeches when unnecessary and inappropriate. You need philosophy to back up and give you a consistent case when you deal with or discuss specific issues. If you like condensations, provided you bear in mind their full meaning, I will say when you ask, what can one do? The answer is speak, provided you know what you are saying. A few suggestions. Do not wait for a national audience. Speak on any scale open to you, large or small, to your friends, your associates, your professional organizations, or any legitimate public forum. You can never tell when your words will reach the right mind at the right time. You will see no immediate results, but it is of such activities that public opinion is made. Do not pass up a chance to express your views on important issues. Write letters to the editors of newspapers and magazines, to TV and radio commentators, and above all, to your congressmen who depend on their constituents. If your letters are brief and rational rather than incoherently emotional, they will have more influence than you suspect. The opportunities to speak are all around you. I suggest that you make the following experiment. Take an ideological inventory of 1 week, i.e., note how many times people utter the wrong political, social, and moral notions as if these were self evident truths with your silent sanctions. Then make it a habit to object to such remarks. No, not to make lengthy speeches which are seldom appropriate, merely to say, I don't agree, and be prepared to explain why if the speaker wants to know. This is one of the best ways to stop the spread of vicious bromides. If the speaker is innocent, it will help him. If he is not, it will undercut his confidence the next time. Most particularly, do not keep silent when your own ideas and values are being attacked. Do not proselytize indiscriminately, i.e., do not force discussions or arguments on those who are not interested or not willing to argue. It is not your job to save everyone's soul. If you do the things that are in your power, you will not feel guilty about not doing somehow the things that are not. I wanted to also interject here when she was saying that about do not make lengthy speeches, which is seldom appropriate, but merely say, I don't agree. One of the things that I've learned, and again, this is after reading a lot of Ayn Rand and getting a little bit deeper into philosophy and just the dynamics, the left right dynamics in this country, is that very, very rarely is the left going to make bold statements. Because again, they don't believe in reality, they don't believe in knowledge, or at least pretend not to. They actually do if you watch the way they act. If you listen to what they say, they profess no reality, no knowledge, no ethics, and no aesthetics either. And they cannot, therefore, make an argument. If you pretend that reality doesn't exist, how can you convince anybody to do what you want, to vote a certain way, to act a certain way, to value certain things? Um, how can you do it? You can't. The only thing you can do is try to trap people, and you do so usually by asking questions. So usually the best thing you can do is, instead of I don't agree, is not making a statement, but what you need to do is ask questions in return. For instance, somebody may say, well, you didn't vote for Donald Trump, did you? Now, how would you handle that situation? Because it's made to sound like an accusation. Now, part of the good thing for the left in asking questions is that it puts them in a power position, first of all, and it also gives them plausible deniability. If anybody accuses them of trying to start trouble, they can say, hey, no, I was just asking. So again, rather than making statements like "I don't agree," listen to what this lefty person is saying to you, and then ask questions. Questions such as, um, sometimes they might ask you an opinion. What is your opinion of X, Y, Z? Excellent response to that, if it's true that you haven't thought about it, is say, well, I really haven't thought about it. What should I think about it? And you'll be amazed at how fast they'll shut up because they don't have an opinion. They cannot, because they're very anti-philosophy, are unable to formulate a positive argument. So, continuing. Let's see. Above all, do not join the wrong ideological groups or movements in order to do something. By ideological, in this context, I mean groups or movements proclaiming some vaguely generalized, undefined, and usually contradictory political goals, e.g., the Conservative Party, which subordinates reason to faith and substitutes theocracy for capitalism, or the libertarian hippies, who subordinate reason to whims and substitute anarchism for capitalism. To join such groups means to reverse the philosophical hierarchy and to sell out fundamental principles for the sake of some superficial political action which is bound to fail. One of the things that I've noticed culturally is the country breaks down into two. And you got left and right politically, and the cultural representation of right and left is, hold on. So, yeah, like I was saying, that it breaks down to idealism and realism, and that the idealists are are people that make the presumption for change, and the realists are the people that make the presumption for the status quo. So when you're evaluating a political idea, one of the helpful things to do is to ask whether or not this particular political party is making the presumption for the status quo, or are they making a presumption or the presumption for change? For instance, libertarians go wrong and err precisely because they make the presumption not for the status quo, but make the presumption for liberty. Socialists go wrong because they make the presumption, again, not for the status quo, but for socialism. Both of these there are what Ayn Rand refused. Both these political theories are two sides of the same coin, or two sides of the same die or dice. So that's the thing that you really got to keep in mind here. That's what makes what she was saying here, that they substitute anarchism for capitalism, blah, 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 blah. Really, their fundamental problem is making the presumption for liberty. And that what they're looking for is an ideal state in which everybody has perfect amount of liberty. That kind of thing doesn't exist. Um, uh, Idealistic states just don't exist. Whether they're socialist, libertarian, conservative, there's a lot of idealistic conservatives that are as movement oriented as the left is. They're trying to create the perfect conservative state, and they're therefore really not conservative. Because if you're conservative, you're going to make the presumption for the status quo. You look at the world from that standpoint, you start all arguments and disagreements from that standpoint. So let's see. It means that you help the defeat of your ideas and the victory of your enemies. For a discussion of the reasons, see The Anatomy of Compromise in my book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. The only groups one may properly join today are ad hoc committees, i.e., groups organized to achieve a single specific, clearly defined goal on which men of differing views can agree. In such cases, no one may attempt to ascribe his views to the entire membership or to use the group to serve some hidden ideological purpose. And this has to be watched very, very vigilantly. I'm omitting the most important contribution to an intellectual movement, writing, because this discussion is addressed to men of every profession. Books, essays, articles are a movement's permanent fuel, but it is worse than futile to attempt to become a writer solely for the sake of a cause. Writing, like any other work, is a profession and must be approached as such. It is a mistake to think that the intellectual movement requires some special duty or self sacrificial effort on your part. It requires something much more difficult, a profound conviction that the ideas are important to you and to your own life. If you integrate that conviction to every aspect of your life, you will find many opportunities to enlighten others. The reader whose letter I quoted indicates the proper pattern of action. As a teacher of astronomy, for several years I've been actively engaged in demonstrating the power of reason and the absolutism of reality to my students. I've also made an effort to introduce your works to my associates, following their reading with discussion when possible, and have made it a point to insist on the use of reason in all of my personal dealings. They're some of the right things to do as often and as widely as possible. But that teacher's question implied a search for some shortcut in the form of an organized movement. No shortcut is possible. It is too late for a movement of people who hold a conventional mixture of contradictory philosophical notions. It is too early for a movement of people dedicated to a philosophy of reason, but it is never too late or too early to propagate the right ideas except under a dictatorship. If a dictatorship ever comes to this country, it will be by the default of those who have kept silent. We are still free enough to speak. Do we have time? No one can tell. But time is on our side because we have an indestructible weapon and an invincible ally if we learn how to use them: reason and reality. And that last little part was absolutely correct. Reason and reality. The left pretends, again, because you cannot actually live your life denying reality. You cannot. You just cannot. And you look at the people on the left, and they respect reality the same way everyone else does. They look both ways before they cross the street. They get to meetings on time. They know what they're supposed to say and do when they get to these meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So, and if you notice with the left again, is that they will rarely come out and say, "Hey, reality doesn't exist." What they do instead is they ask questions. They'll say, "Well, reality, well, how do we know? How do we know?" And there's a trap. The question is a trap. Okay, so you have to listen carefully and know that that kind of trap question is coming. Um, the proper answer to that question, the right answer to that question, by the way, is by the evidence of our senses, ultimately, by our minds and the evidence of our senses. So, if anybody ever asks you that, well, reality, how do we know? That's the proper answer, with our minds and by the evidence of our senses. So that's the conclusion of chapter 17, and tomorrow will be chapter 18, called Don't Let It Go. So when I come back, going to be a short critique of Rush Limbaugh. Okay, so I'm back, and this is from the Playboy interview of 1993. So it's a little clip here. Playboy, that would indicate that you don't find much difference between the candidates. Tell us how George Bush and Bill Clinton differ, because this is in response to Rush's statement calling it the Bush-Clinton years. Limbaugh, I think about the 1990 budget deal over which President Bush presided. Its inherent tax increases when the nation was just beginning a recession deepened the recession. The violation of his "read my lips" promise contributed to a deflating national attitude and to anger. But what Bill Clinton is doing goes far beyond policy. Rather than being a new Democrat, Bill Clinton is the worst of the old Democrats. I mean, he's right out of the FDR mold. He has successfully exploited fraud and lies and class envy to catapult himself to the presidency. He does something that George Bush would never have done, and that is blame the achievers. Playboy, explain that. Limbaugh, the people who benefited in the 80s are the people who worked, and they did really well. But Bill Clinton tells the middle and lower classes in this country, quote, those people benefited unfairly. Furthermore, they got money that was targeted for you, unquote. In essence, he's saying, quote, they stole it from you, unquote. Well, that creates class envy, and Bill Clinton exploits it. He convinces people that the government is their only hope for prosperity, and I think we need an exact turnaround. I think people need to be told that if they just invest in themselves in rugged individualism and excellence instead of sameness and equality, then who knows what they can be. And so I'm going to stop right there in that middle of his response. And where he's wrong, again, is that he's not, his analysis here is shallow. What Bill Clinton is doing, and President Obama has done the same thing, is he is basically declaring the preeminence of the malevolent universe premise. Because again, the malevolent universe premise says that the universe is a mess, it is unpredictable, it is scary, it's just a nightmare ongoing, just one problem after another. There's no way we can know or understand anything in this universe, and therefore failure is to be expected. Well, if any person looks around, what do they see? They see success everywhere, every day, or I should say, put it a little bit more accurately, most of the time by most people. You see success. It's just the only difference is between, say, me and Donald Trump is scale. Okay, so how does a person like Bill Clinton, who is trying to promote this malevolent universe premise, then square those two things? His allegation that this is a terrible universe that's scary and unknowable with the fact that we succeed each and every day. Well, there's only three possible explanations when you get down to it for that dichotomy, so to speak, and that is that those people that are successful were successful because they got lucky, they cheated, or a combination of the two. And what Bill Clinton is saying when he says, quote, those people benefited unfairly. Furthermore, they got money that was targeted for you, unquote. And, quote, they stole it from you, quote. There you go. Bold, flat out. They cheated. And so anybody that's big government is going to be then saying that we need government to square the books, to make things fair again, to keep these people from cheating. And since we know that we can't stop all their little cheating, so what we're going to have to do is take the money away from them, tax them, not so much because we need to build roads and whatnot, but so we can redistribute income, so we can take money, the success from the cheaters and the people that got lucky, and give it to the honest people who don't cheat and haven't gotten lucky. You and me, the poor, the lower middle classes, etc. But the fact of the matter is, and then Rush Limbaugh, of course, screws up his response to this. He says, if they just invest in themselves, rugged individualism and excellence instead of sameness and equality. No, what you want to tell people is, hey, it's a benevolent universe. Success is to be expected. If you're a failure, you've got to ask yourself why. Success is to be had. What is it that you're doing wrong? Are you an alcoholic? Are you a drug addict? Are you a gambler? Are you just a layabout? You're just somebody that really is uninterested in going out and making yourself and your life better. Maybe you have some medical issues. Maybe you're depressed. Whatever the issue is, you can, there's again, since success is to be expected, it is expected that you can recover from these issues and problems and go on to prosper, go on to be successful. Maybe you will not be as successful as Donald Trump or Bill Gates, but you can go on to live a happy life and be a successful person. So, when I come back, it is going to be time for the New York City cab driver's joke book. Okay, we're back. And this is the New York City cab driver's joke book. So let's see what we got here. A man is marooned on an island for 10 years and has given up all hope of ever being saved, when suddenly, one day, a woman washes ashore. Her clothes are all tattered, and she's clutching a little waterproof bag. It seems that her ship also hit the coral reef off the island and has sunk. She, too, was the only survivor. The man, overjoyed at seeing another person, blurts out his whole story about how he managed to live on the island alone, how he learned to live off the land, surviving by his wits. When he has finished his story, the woman says to him, "You mean you've been on this island for 10 years?" "That's right," says the man. "Tell me," she asks, "did you smoke cigarettes before you were marooned?" "Why, yes, I did," he says. "Why do you ask?" The woman says to him, "Well, since you haven't had a cigarette in 10 years, here," and with that she pulls a cigarette out of her little bag and gives it to him. "Oh, wow," he says. "Thanks a lot." As she lights it for him, she says, "Say, were you a drinking man before you got shipwrecked?" "Well," says the man, puffing on the cigarette, "I would have an occasional whiskey now and then." The woman reaches into her little bag and says, "You haven't had a drink in 10 years? Here." From her bag, she produces a small flask and hands it to him. He takes a pull from the flask and is thanking her when she suddenly says, "Gee, I just realized you've been on this island for 10 years, and I guess you haven't played around in 10 years either, have you?" "Good God," says the man. "Do you have a set of golf clubs in that bag?" What's the difference between a hobo and a homo? A hobo doesn't have any friends at all, whereas a homo has friends up the ass. A man goes in for a thorough physical examination. He comes in about a week later for the test results and says, "Well, that's the story, doctor. Am I healthy?" "Well," says the doctor, "I have some good news and some bad news." The man says, "Give me the bad news first." "All right," says the doctor. "If you have a fatal disease and you only have about a week to live." "Oh, no," says the man. "But tell me, doc, what's the good news?" Doctor tells him, "You know that great-looking nurse out there?" The man says, "Yes." "Well," says the doctor, "I finally screwed her." Two wasps are making love. Afterward, the man says to the woman, "What's the matter? Didn't you like it?" The woman says, "Of course I liked it." "What gave you the idea that I didn't?" "Well," says the man, "you moved." One day the Pope gets a phone call from God. God says to him, "Since you've been such a good Pope, I wanted you to be the first to know." "The first to know what?" says the Pope. God says, "I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that I've decided that from now on the world will have only one religion." "That's wonderful," says the Pope. "Now everyone will be peaceful and get along with one another." "That's great, but what's the bad news?" "In a few days," says God, "you'll be receiving a phone call from Salt Lake City." Did you hear about the tight end who went to prison? He came out a wide receiver. And with that, we will conclude today's episode of Story Time. And until tomorrow, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.